Contrary to all of these proposals, the proposal was by Sarja is a systematic, decentralized model of an expanding system. Sarja did not enter the competition. It was in fact imposed by the central government in Madrid, which at the time was a progressive government. And Sarja, even though, well, for those of you who don't know, Barcelona is the capital of Catalonia, and Sarja was Catalan, was living in Barcelona, but was also reformist, was an engineer, but also active in politics and very committed socially to processes of reform. And he was commissioned by some of his connections from the central government in Madrid to start elaborating a plan. So after the competition was finished, that result was overruled by Madrid, and the project of Sarja was implemented, which the political aspects behind it might lead to another lecture, but just also for you to give a context, to have a context. So why Sarja is so important? Because together with the plan, which is usually the most disseminated or well-known document or work of Sarja, he elaborated something I've been already referring in the previous part of the lecture. He elaborated a full new theory of urbanization, starting from the invention of the very word urbanization that refers back to the urbs, the Roman urbs that we've seen so far, right? So the material, legal, and symbolic foundation of a city. He claims that the word city, coming from civitas, doesn't really capture all of the complexity and the multi-layered aspects of the new model he wants to propose. And then he engages really in a thorough etymological study and eventually proposes to draw on these Latin urbs to invent the new term urbanización, meaning urbanization. So, but besides inventing the word, he basically invents a whole new discipline and publishes this 1,000 pages treatise in several volumes, which actually went unfinished, and that draws on previous work that he's been also working for a few decades already. And as we've seen before. So Sarja was really fascinated by the new technologies of transport and movement, as we have already realized earlier. And he really believed that the steam engine, for instance, or the new transformations in the locomotion or in the speed of transmission would really lead humanity to a new civilization, which he saw a kind of possibility to move into a full fraternal world, uniting peoples, or peoples united in a way. So he could really see these new technologies as social progress, is as a way of uniting peoples of the world, you could say, perhaps in a bit of a utopian way, but this was really his belief as a progressive reformist. And he could already saw that the conflict emerging, we've been referring at the beginning of the lecture also, this tension arising in modernity, arising with industrialization, the economic, social conflicts and tensions really embodied in this progress. And he could really see this struggle between two civilizations, right, where the battle would largely happen in this new urban, in this new urbe, in these new urbs. He was kind of trying to figure out. And to come to put together his theory, he really went into, and also, for you to believe that we really engage in a full new establishment of a science. It was not that he just started drawing a grid, but he really engaged in a full, thorough study of, you could say, Western culture since medieval times, and he went into study from the classic architecture treatise from Vitruvius, to study law from Solomon to Bentham, to the study of society from Plato to Proudhon, to study sanitation from Hippocrates to the present day, studying statistics from Moses to the present, studies on geography, studies on political economy, studies on morals and religion, studies on philosophy. He really believed that this new urban space, this new urban model should incorporate all of the complexities and all of the layers of a civilization, of a culture, right? So that you couldn't really detach urban planning from all of these other disciplines, because it was basically the expression. The urban space was basically the expression of law, of philosophy, of economy, of geography, of technology, sanitation, and so on. So that coined the term urbanization as the set of principles, doctrines, and rules that should be applied so that buildings and their conglomerations, as opposed to constricting, distorting, and corrupting the physical, moral, and intellectual faculties of social humans, which is what happened in the industrial cities, the crowded, dense and unhealthy medieval towns, can help promote their development and vitally, thereby, improving individual well-being. That would be one of the essential aims for Sarja, right? To construct a space that provides well-being for the urban dweller, the sum total of which constitutes public prosperity. And now going back to the plan, Sarja was in fact first commissioned a survey, a cartographic survey, who is also a cartographer, of the plain of Barcelona in 1855, and which was also essential to the laydown of the extension project. This extremely careful and precise survey of the topography, of the irrigation systems, of the agrarian, of the traces of the former agrarian activities, of the connections into the county and into the regions by road, so by the newly arrived railway system, networks. So techniques of representation and cartography as essential instrument to actually apply, into which set up a ground, into which later on apply a new model of expansion. And from the first survey, later on proposed the well-known grid expansion plan, which as essential features had not only the repetition of the grid, but also the decentralization of the city center in the medieval times. So according to Sarja, he displaced the new urban center away from the historic medieval core, as you can see, more or less an empty spot in the crossing of these two diagonals, more or less on the mid-center of the grid system, and then establishing a system of ways and interways that more or less expand equally in both directions, right? So by this apparently simple operation, but actually largely studied, deeply studied, he completely radically changes the scale of the city, transforms the former city into a regional entity, and he also links it to a territorial system of circulation, where the ways and the roads, the former roads that link to the larger area, become essential urban axes that cut the city all throughout, right? Sometimes it's also looked at this project by Cerda as very repetitive, and is criticized for being very homogeneous. So one same model repeated all the time, but actually his proposal was much more nuanced, and it was not only based on the repetition of the expansion of a grid or the repetition of a urban block, but it was a much more complex system, also linking to community neighborhood districts, to governance policies, and it was arranged along. It was largely driven by the idea of equality, so equal distribution of urbanity, all for all of the citizens of the city, and equal distribution of facilities and resources in the city. So as you can see in this version, there are a series of red squares, more or less distributed equally across the grid, which these are public center or community centers, we could call them. And in these district centers, you would have markets, education, let's say public facilities that arrange communities around them. So it would be a scale of governance also, breaking down this full metropolis into smaller district units, you could say, that also provide another scale of city life, if you want. So in order to formulate his thesis, Cerda put forward 5 bases that really were underpinning or supporting this thesis, from which the plan, that is the definition of streets, infrastructures, dimensions, measurements, programs, and so on, was only the technical part. So the planner was the technical part, but had more other bases that were essential to his theory. There was an economic basis, a legal basis, an administrative basis, and a political basis. Maybe I move forward, and you can read this later on. I can share the slides, not to take that much time. But it's very important to understand that the grid plan is a result for Cerda. Is never a it comes after a very thorough analysis and investigation of all of these aspects. It is only the result of this theory that really spatializes in a better way all of these 5 bases, right? And it includes a series of doctrines and a series of rules to actually redistribute land ownership, to define or to control the rearrangement or the reparcellation, so the rearrangement of the property structure, control through norms and city ordinances. The build form also includes a series of governance, so a series of administrative relations to this built environment, right? So who's responsible of what, implies also a series of responsibilities and duties between landowners and administrations, between landowners to landowners, and between city inhabitants, citizens and dwellers to administrations, and so on. So a pretty kind of complex design of the administration of all of these new urbs. And then also a political basis for all of this. How Cerda started designing the plan was, in fact, and going back to the urbs quadrata, so the square former urbs, the module of his plan is not really, contrary to what's many times assumed, it's never the urban block. is not really the square, or is not really the grid. The key essential point for Sarja is the crossroads. We could almost call it this foundation, and this really shows the deep knowledge that he had in urban history, in Roman history, and in urban developments over time. So he really focuses on this moment of intersection, not only as a, let's say, as a symbolic representation of space of a foundation of a city that divides the city in four, that establishes a center, but he picks on this to create a model that is repeated by the expansion or by the repetition of these centers, of these crossroads. And this is the moment of intersection that he most closely looks and tries to define what's the appropriate measurement, what's the appropriate dimension, what's the appropriate distance for mobility of new modes of transports, of turning radius, of visual perspective and angles, and what's the perfect ideal distance, so width of a street, to the point that he even defines the measurement of the sidewalk, the number of trees, and and the distance between trees. So it really puts together a full project of the infrastructural space, the support of this new metropolis, which, most importantly, to make it a difference to all of the other projects at the time, probably, and this is where the great innovation, the novelty lies, is all based on we could call the unbuilt space. So all of his work, not all of his work actually, but a large part of his work is looking at the unbuilt, at the infrastructure, at the public space, at the system of streets, right? Instead of the built form, or instead of the location or the representation of the public building. It's more focusing on the infrastructure of the system. And here you can see a set of studies of this chamfer, of this edge cut square, and also the study of the radius and the advantages and disadvantages of different measurements of different radius, and so on and so forth. There was two basic elements or features that the new plan had to provide to the inhabitant of the new urbs. One was movement and circulation, essential to this new civilization he believed he was entering, and also rest. So again, going back to this well-being, or to this modern city as a city of opposite extremes, right? On the one hand, efficiency and circulation; on the other hand, rest and relaxed space for the living, the space for the housing. These were the two essential features of the new city, right? And when he started to sketch or to design, to fill in, so once he came about with the right dimensions and measurements and geographies of the crossroads, from here he built up by repeating after 130 meters the grid. And once the grid was laid out, he started also to develop what he called the interways, intervias. So he never really started from the block, but started from the ways, intersection, then built up the distance to the next way, so the next street, and the space in between ways, he called them interways, the space left between roads or streets, right? And this is what became the block. All of this was based on, so these design decisions or design principles were based in vast compilation of statistics, empirical. He engaged in an extremely thorough analysis of living conditions of the working class in the old town. And the second volume of the General Theory of Urbanization is actually fully dedicated to statistics. It's 600 pages of statistics. And also he elaborated a series of formulae to come about with standards of density, standards of heights, standards of distances, and so on and so forth, with a level of precision that brought him to define the ideal density of this new urbe of 250 inhabitants per hectare, which equal more or less 40 square meters by inhabitant. So each inhabitant of this new city should enjoy 40 square meters of space, right? Which gives you a pretty low density compared to contemporary standards. And as I already mentioned earlier, the grid plan by Serdà is not just a repetition of a square or a repetition of a block. It's much more nuanced, and the closer you look at it, the more you see differences between the streets. So even though there is an ideal crossing, an ideal distance, 130 meters between street and street, then there are many exceptions, which is where the Serdà planner, not the theoretician, but the Serdà planner really comes in, the Serdà designer. And you find that many streets have slight specificities or differences, either in an alignment, or in width, or in the diagonals that he introduced. Some later urbanists in Barcelona really engaged in full, thorough analysis of the documents left by Serdà. It came about with this theoretical model, which is much more refined to the expansion of the grid, right? That goes back to these questions I was mentioning earlier. The differences in the occupation, in the densification of the urban blocks, that he also saw different with great variety from one to the other. So as you see in the top left diagram, defining a series of streets which are more heavily built than others and create like a superstructure within the structure, or they're also looking at the distribution of facilities and public buildings. So there was an egalitarian distribution of public facilities across the grid, or also on the lower left, a kind of an orthogonal relation of this superstructure or super grid within the grid, linking different neighborhood units or neighborhood districts, including green spaces, civic spaces, so on and so forth, and also introducing these diagonal cuts that would reframe the rigidness or the stiffness of the grid. And I think, yeah. How much time we have left? Because I cannot see my time here.
Right, we have 7 more minutes left.
7, all right.
Maybe it's a good time to stop and ask for some questions and continue next Friday.
Yeah, so here's some real, this is not original drawing from Serdà, but it's a recreation of his sketches on how the city might have looked like if some of his ordinances or some of his calculations and sketch designs were implemented. So as you see, compared to the present built environment, a much more open, less dense, and much more green structure. But this, I would argue, is the strength of the plan, of the project, that it really allowed lots of transformation and modification of the original plan, still keeping up with the strength of the original project. So I can stop sharing.
Right. Are there any questions then?
Yeah, I could ask that this Barcelona system is extremely like mathematical. But how's the relation into the existing landscape in general? Like, do you see a lack in there in that kind of systems? Like it's like a mathematical system just put there, but if you look the edges doesn't, you know, take into account so well the existing somehow, or can you explain the relations maybe between the system and the existing, like the existing landscapes?
Landscapes or the existing settlements?
Yeah, I mean the existing landscape in general, like the before the cityscape. You know, like for example, I don't know what was there before. For example, the rivers, the mountain valley shapes and stuff, because the grid doesn't fit in that too well. I mean,
I would probably have a double answer. So when Cerdà thinks of his plan, he has a new scale of what the city will be in the future. So he doesn't think anymore in the scale of, as we've seen, you know, in the lecture, the scale of this enclosed, dense core. So he's envisioning almost a territorial system, a full expansion of the urban, of the process of urbanization into the landscape, you would say. And it would merge, at the end, it would merge both natural and urban features into one built environment, would say. And in that sense, it's probably true that it doesn't take into consideration some aspects of the former landscape, as, for instance, the structure of the agrarian land or things like that, because they're absorbed into this process of urbanization. They're swollen into this process. But on the other hand, at the larger scale, the metropolitan scale, I would argue that he does follow the landscape elements and features, because maybe we can actually go back to the image. Am I sharing now? Yeah, now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back here. So, yeah, we didn't make it here, but in fact, this is what I was referring, and maybe connecting to your question. You see here how the process of urbanization really absorbed the previous landscape into this new order, which is what he believes is this new civilization. You could see it almost as like a colonization process, right? But this is really what he believes: ruralize the urban, urbanize the rural. Bring urban features into the rural space, bring rural features into the urban space. But as you see, I think this picture is really strong, and it really shows this new logic of imposition of the new order. So in this sense, I would agree with you, you're right. But on the other hand, if we go back to the plan, the actual limits of the plan are determined by natural elements. So what you can see on the right is a river, and this is where he traces the edge, one edge of the grid, together with this large park that it was never built actually. And on the left-hand side also it stops. So this, can you see my pointer?
Yep.
Okay, so this is a hill. So the grid actually adapts to topographical conditions. The river here, obviously the water shore on this side, then the hill that is left intact as a natural hill or mountain. And on this side here, it doesn't show it. Here comes another river. So in a way, the grid expansion stops, and on top here, what you cannot see either, but here, this more or less following this curve, there is where the slope heals up. The hills really start sloping up. So basically the grid covers a plain terrain, a plain topography, but is adapted to the natural elements of the landscape at this large scale of the region in a way, right? So the mountains on the top, the sea on the bottom, and the two rivers on each side. And then these roads that you see stretching out from the grid are all roads that he integrates, right? So I would say, yeah, you're right to some extent. He imposes a new order, more, let's say, scientific, but on the other hand, he integrates landscape features of regional scale. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, it looks like we've reached 1 o'clock. So I would propose, if you have some further questions, please send them to me. I collect them and forward to Adria if there are any. If there aren't, we are continuing Friday morning, 10:45, the same regime, and I have recorded it. I don't know exactly how it goes, but at the end of it, we will try to distribute the recording among the listeners. And Adria, you said you are willing to send the slides as well.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah.
Okay, so I will distribute that through the drive. And of course, we can't applaud you, but mentally the applause is here. Thank you very much. It has been very interesting indeed. To me, as it always has been. I learned again new things, by the way. And see you all on Friday.